Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, we're going to get started here in just a moment. We're going to let folks come on in to the webinar room. Hello, welcome. So glad that you're here with us for Are Your DEI Programs Up for the Challenge of Social Disruption? Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Come on in. When you get a moment, let us know. There you go. Sheila just said it. We're happy you're here. We absolutely want this to be beneficial to you, so we'll be looking for your input. Don't hesitate to send us a question, make a comment, let us know where you're dialing in from today. All right, we've got a lot to cover. So we're just going to jump on in and get started. My name is Anissa Avon, and we're going to talk today about a framework. And this framework is about lean DEI, which is in fact our methodology that we're going to introduce you to. But what's really important that we want you to be able to take away from today is that the framework has a certain methodology that you can walk away with and apply to your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So Lean DEI combines next-gen artificial intelligence with high-touch people development to deliver a right-sized solution for building an inclusive culture. So if you're just joining us, I want to say thank you. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Do take a moment and send us a hello in your chat box. Let us know where you're dialing in from. So I want to take a moment and introduce you to our management team, the Lean DEI management team. You see us right here. Anissa, hello, Shweta. Hello, Vivek.
Hello.
Shweta Pai is the CEO of Org Analytics. Vivek Mehta is the CEO of Weave, and myself, Anissa Avon, I'm the CEO of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. I'm going to start with sharing a little about myself, and then Shweta and Vivek will introduce themselves. They will introduce themselves. So just a little bit about why I'm so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically Lean DEI. I am the CEO and founder of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. Turnkey was founded in 2004, and we are a global learning services outsourcing provider. We specialize in coaching, HR and OD consulting, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and strategic growth planning. We help our clients specifically be more strategic about their leadership and their employee development goals. With more than 1,000 coaches in the US and in key hubs globally, our team has some pretty serious credentials and deep experience in this space. But here's what matters to me about this conversation: helping companies exceed their diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace goals is deeply important to me on a personal and a professional level. Personally, as a white, proud to be a Texan woman, I have been in the midst of a family where I have to personally fight hard to overcome and eliminate many biases and racial fears. And these were issues that I was raised with. In my family, my siblings and I either conformed to the racist views of our loving to us, but racist to everyone else father, or we were belittled and rejected. And at some point, even for me personally, afraid of being banished forever from my family. And so it's very personal to me. On a professional level, I consider this work to be more important than anything I've ever contributed to. I believe if we are to create a just society with full and equal participation in a world where the distribution of opportunities is equitable and humans are physically and psychologically secure and safe, then leveraging the power of business and development opportunities inside organizations, what I would consider conscious capitalism, I believe that holds the greatest probability for success, just my opinion. And so, this vision and mission for making a difference is what this management team has in common. So, from the moment Vivek and Shweta and I started talking, we have literally spent hours upon hours. We've set aside all other projects at times to make this a focus. And we're very excited to bring this to you. Shweta, would you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about you and Organalytics?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anisa. Yeah, I mean, this is this partnership and this solution that we've built is something that we're really, really excited about. And DEI in general is something I've been very passionate about. Organalytics is a tech software that's about almost 5 years old and that focuses on measuring unconscious biases within companies and helping leaders really identify, and we'll talk more about some of the functionalities, but it really focuses on how do we identify those key people who are impacted from these negative behavioral norms, and help them build a sustainable program around it. So we've been in this field for 5 years. We're one of the only ones, who've been in here for as long as we have doing what we do. We started way before even Me Too, and mainly because this is something I've worked in a lot of very large companies. My background is rooted in finance and investment banking, and I've worked in a lot of very, very large companies, and I've been completely frustrated by how, for the amount of effort and money that gets spent on DEI programs, how little the needle moves. And it's for a variety of reasons. And it's that frustration that led me to create my startup. But then really that startup and evolve that into what this solution is, which is Lean DEI, which to me is the next evolution of what Organalytics built. So I'm really excited to kind of share this with you guys. And really, I want to hear feedback from you.
Yeah.
We want to hear from you to say, hey, does this connect? Is what we are thinking and what we're building, is this in line with what you guys need? So we would love your feedback. I'll turn it over to Vivek.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Vivek. I'm the CEO of Weave. At Weave, we help people leaders to build happier and higher performing teams. In a previous life, I was a consultant for Fortune 100 companies. My job was moving from company to company in different industries of different sizes. And I started to see a trend, which was this growing disconnect between employees and leaders. And it's for a multitude of reasons. There are new technologies, faster paces of work, most recently, this big shift to remote. But the question became, how do we build strong employee leader relationships no matter where we are? At Weave, we use AI and natural language processing to solve that question. And that aspect of what we do is kind of what ties together the Lean DEI framework we're going to tell you more about today.
Beautiful. So we have a lot to cover, but here's what's really important to the three of us is that this is useful to you. While once again, we're going to talk about a framework that is identify, engage, and solve, which we've put together in Lean DEI program. What we know is this framework and methodology will work for you too, whether our solution is right for you or not. So we're going to talk today about the DEI landscape, that diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape, and how it's changed quite a bit. If you're on this call and you're responsible for DEI initiatives, then you already know how much it's changed. We're going to talk about the elephant in the room, and I don't even have to tell you what that is. I bet you already know. But we're going to talk about that ticking time bomb and what to do about it. We're also going to talk about what it looks like to create culture change through a right-sized change management approach, which will make your program so much more effective than traditional once and done or hit and miss style DEI initiatives. So Vivek, talk to us about what's happening.
Thanks, Nisa. So as we all know, the world is changing. Social disruption is happening. We can choose to try and keep up. We can get run over by that change, or we can help to actually drive it. At this point, everyone knows the stats. D&I have been C-level issues for years now. Inclusive organizations are more innovative. They have greater returns, lower turnover. They capture more market share. But we still see companies struggle. At Bon Appetit, there's been a culture of microaggressions. Black employees are speaking out at Facebook and Google. WeWork is being sued for age discrimination. Twitter, Nike, Goldman Sachs are being sued by women in pursuit of the C-suite. Very famously, in 2018, Starbucks was all over the news where a manager called the police on two Black men. They were arrested within 10 minutes of them just sitting at a table while they were waiting for a friend. In response, Starbucks very publicly shut down all 8,000 stores to do their trainings. But fast forward to 2020, and they're back in the news for banning employees for wearing BLM attire. The lesson here is that even though companies are taking this issue seriously, they're pouring impressive resources into unconscious bias trainings, they're ultimately being reactive to issues. And consequently, their culture is not changing, which kind of begs the question, if companies are aware of the benefits of being inclusive and diverse, and they're well aware of the costs of not doing so, what are we missing? What's the gap today?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's where we started when we were starting to come together for Lean DEI. We started to look at what we have seen because jointly we've been, as Anissa said, we've had a lot of experiences looking at a lot of different DEI type programs and along the evolution. And we started to notice trends. Here's what we've seen with a lot of the D&I initiatives. And to be fair, this isn't every company, but this is a lot of companies. And this is when we look at trends on especially the companies that stumble, this is what we see. We see that D&I initiatives are structurally flawed because they're like that Starbucks example. It tends to be one-off piecemeal initiative, like the closing all the stores to do a training for one issue. It's in response to a PR nightmare, but they're not looking at this holistically. On top of that, it tends to be a lot of times companies have top-down centralized programs, which mean that they tend to be really broad and generic, and they're not down at their operational level. And those operational leaders don't have the support that they need because everything is sitting centralized at HQ. But the real biases and the impact of these biases and where the impact is being felt within the organization, it's rarely right at the top. It's actually down at the bottom at that operational level. I come from a manufacturing background. It's at that factory floor level. That's where you see that impact. But these D&I programs are not quite there. There isn't full support at that level. And on top of that, because of the way that it tends to be structured and because of the way that it's looked at, it's almost seen as this black box investment that people make with no measurable ROI. Nobody really goes back and says, "Oh, did we actually get what we were supposed to?" It's just, again, it's a knee-jerk reaction, a check the box reaction to something that people are supposed to do, but there's no accountability, very little ROI. And because of all of that, there's also very little long-term impact. So we started to say, okay, now that we know that these are the common themes around the current status quo, what's really happening underneath let's dig one step further. I will talk about this. I come from that 4 why or 5 whys methodology. You keep asking the why. So why does this happen now? When we dug deeper, we saw discrimination is not all discrimination is obvious, and not all solutions are effective because of that disparity. So again, now we dig in a little bit more, and this is where I'll turn it over to Anissa to talk about what those programs really, why they don't match up.
Well, thank you, Shweta and Vivek. So in addition to traditional DEI solutions being often disparate, not always, but often, and structurally flawed, there are complex social forces at play currently. And not, as you had mentioned, not all discrimination is obvious or even intentional. And so what this means to our programs is when done alone and in isolation, training is often divisive, which is the exact opposite of what we're wanting to do with our training. Coaching can be expensive and unpredictable, and often without proper structure, you don't even know what they're working on. Awareness alone fails to inspire diversity appreciation. There is this disparate puzzle pieces that happen across an organization that aims to raise awareness, but doesn't have the proper culture change or change management options along with it. And then diversity policies. Well, there's a lot of conversation happening right now where diversity policies are actually being one of the things brought up in wrongful termination and discrimination lawsuits, for example. So it's a minefield. What we know is resistance is predictable, and we need to be prepared for that. What we know is that we're at a tipping point, and social injustice combined with systemic and structural discrimination and polarized entirely opposite views from people that it's like a civil war in some aspects. We've got some of us learning about microaggressions that we didn't even know we perpetrated, and some folks call that subtle acts of exclusion. For example, we've got social identity insecurity and long overdue change in the tide. So all of this is coming together to create this organizational crisis, the perfect storm, so to speak. And while we could have been aware enough to see it coming, it's here. And most diversity and inclusion officers and leaders aren't quite as prepared as they would have liked to have been, simply because of the lack of support and the lack of funds and the lack of buy-in across the organization to make it happen. So let's talk a little bit now about, okay, so we know resistance is going to happen. So what do you do? What exactly needs to happen to extinguish that fuse of resistance and still move the needle on your program? So knowing why there will be resistance means that we can design our programs in a way to be more effective. We can minimize the threat to one's social identity. So, which is exactly what causes the majority of resistance. Social identity theory, many of you may have heard about it. It was popularized in a 1986 research by Teifel and Turner. They proposed that the groups which people belong to, the classes, the groups, the identity factors where people belong to, were an important source of pride and self-esteem. And as an automatic response, group members experience what's called a social identity threat when the moral behavior of their group is called into question. So as you consider how to structure and refocus your DEI programs, some of the best practices include shifting the conversation. We want to focus on progress made. We want to focus on the value of diversity, the business case for diversity. There's a lot of really great numbers out there. For example, in companies where with greater diversity in leadership, they outperform their competitors by as much as 33%. So when we start focusing on the value, it's a lot I wouldn't say easier, but people can buy in because now we're beginning to see, oh, this is also part of a strategic priority. We want to look at how we can eliminate public shaming. It's a big deal inside organizations. It's a big deal on social media and in the media. And when it comes to your DEI programs, you've got to have an expert methodology for diffusing public shaming and making that not acceptable inside your programs. We want to focus on the behaviors of inclusion with just enough awareness about what exclusion looks like for people not to feel threatened. We want to listen to our employees. We want to avoid, overall, we want to avoid a dominant focus on historical injustices in order for the majority groups to not feel attacked, which would in turn lead the minority groups exhausted and just done with this whole conversation, for example. Which is the elephant in the room, right? The elephant in the room is that we know that DEI defensiveness is real right now. It's almost in the air. We're seeing it every time we turn on the TV in responses to, our constitutional right to peaceful protest, for example. And DEI defensiveness inside the workplace will derail your programs. So we're going to want to shift from a dominant focus on historical injustices, even though that's a valid focus, but it's going to cause your majority groups to resist, deny, and withdraw support for the DEI goals. And we need majority support to accomplish the goals. And once you start seeing too much resistance, your minority groups are going to feel even more excluded, even more exhausted, even more frustrated. And now you've got the ticking time bomb. So this lean DEI approach allows you to take let me share a little bit about lean DEI. It's an end-to-end solution to build an inclusive workplace. It's about enabling diverse hiring, team building, and decision making at all levels of the organization using network analysis, artificial intelligence driven employee monitoring and conversation, and targeted development opportunities like coaching, training, and mentoring, and micro consulting, and facilitated discussion circles. It's not only possible, but assured that you can enable diverse hiring and team building when you take a step back and provide just the right diagnostic and the right solution to the right people at the right time. So let's talk a little bit about this framework. As I mentioned earlier, the framework that we're sharing, while of course it's about lean DEI and what we've put together, but this framework of identify, engage, and solve is something that applies to every single one on this call and your goals to implement and create a respectful culture that is focused on inclusivity and diversity and building an equitable workplace. So it works with a continuous cultural transformation driven by cutting edge artificial intelligence and world-class coaching. You're going to go through 3 stages in your program. First, you're going to identify what are those unconscious biases, who are the employees that are impacted, who are the key leaders who can make a difference. Next, you're going to engage with those employees. And Kim, our empathetic AI chatbot, is an always available resource for employees to voice their needs. If you've ever wished that after a training program or a development program, you could just keep the conversation alive because through change management conversations is the only way to change a culture. That's what Engage does. It keeps the conversation alive. She intelligently deep dives to actionable issues and escalates them to people leaders and even crowdsources the solutions that are needed. Then finally is solve. So you want to make sure that your people leaders have access to expert D&I consultants for education, training, coaching, and to improve their interpersonal effectiveness skills, their skills for diffusing conflict. We want to enable them to take the right actions and make the right decisions. Which brings us to identify, Shweta.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Anissa. So as we talked about, one of the first step to combating that defensiveness and to build something that is truly transformational, we have to start with identifying and making sure that our programs are addressing the needs of the people who these behaviors are actually impacting. That's where our first step comes in. We look at how people are organized, which is what you see on the left is how people typically think about their organizations, a regular org chart. But we know that this is not exactly how we actually operate. We operate in this manner right here with a lot of different relationships that are built on different foundations. And the thing is, when research has shown over many years, because this is a science that's been around, this network science, is that this your organization flexes when it responds to stress or when it builds even your cultural norms. They are built on the fabric that these threads, these connections build. That's what it's actually built on. It's not just that org chart, it's these relationships that have nothing to do with the org chart often. So that is really where we come in to say, okay, let's look under the hood of the org chart and let's look at your network map and how your employees are really networked together. The way that we do it is a very simple process. It's a 6-question survey that we ask employees to take. Each of the 6 questions are specific to a different scenario. Each scenario, such as social connections versus whom do you go to when you have a problem, whom do you go to when you have an idea, whom do you go to for advice. These are, each one of them can be your mentorship network, your trust network, your idea validation network, and each one tells us a different story and a different dimension of how your employees are connected to each other. And that's what the network map on the right hand tells us. So we ask those 6 questions. They each convert into a network map, which we then have machine learning models analyze to identify, hey, here is where you're really breaking. Here are the people who are on the outside, who are on the periphery of your mentorship network, say. Or here are the people whose ideas are just not being heard because they have all these great ideas, but they're only kind of talking to each other. They're siloed. So we can, our tools really do that assisted diagnosis and then help companies really do that exploratory. And it's really a very simple method when we actually see it. On the left, what you see is a screenshot from our screen, from our tool. This is a network map. This is how it looks like once we actually see it. And you can see all those little dots on the left are all each individual person. It's an employee. They're connected to each other with those responses from those questions or those relationships or those connections. And then we can then start to tag them. We can start to apply clustering algorithms so that we can say, hey, here are the people who are kind of clustered away together. They're not talking to this other group. So you have a silo problem. Or maybe like what we can see here, you have a big circle. So that means that person is very influential, but that one person, if that person is gone, you then have a bunch of people who are just kind of floating off into ether, just not connected to anyone because they're all just connected to one person. So we can see that level of detail. And what that does is it helps us see who's exactly the people who are on the periphery. So who are the at-risk employees who are actually kind of out of the loop. Maybe their mentorship, maybe it's ideas, maybe it's just trust. They just don't feel like they have anyone to go to with their problems. We can see how people connect to each other, but that's how the unconscious biases come in. And then most importantly for us and for Lean, we can identify those big circles, those people who are actually influential, because what that tells us is those people are already acting with a level of, within the organization, they already have some level of authority that they have built in through these connections that helps them affect change. So now we can amplify their reach. We can potentially help basically leverage them and their connections to get our message across. So when we have a change, when we want a DEI program, those are the people you want to make sure are involved and included. So that's really the first step, is just that identify who's at risk, identify these biases that are at play, and who are the key people who can help you affect change. And once we know all three of these these steps, then we can dive into how do we engage. And that's where I'll turn it over to Vivek.
Thanks, Vita. So engagement at its core means communicating with employees, having conversations with them to understand the issues that they're facing, and more importantly, taking the steps and actions to resolve those issues and involving employees in that issue resolution. Now, it's easy to envision having these conversations when you're at a small organization, but how do we have these conversations at scale and with our distributed workforces? And most importantly, how do we make sure that the conversation is continuous? And for those of you that are in larger organizations, I want you to meet Kim. Kim is an always available chatbot that has organic conversation with employees to understand issues and needs. She lives on your messaging platform. Chatting with her feels like DMing with a coworker. Now, she's got this very interesting combination of anonymity plus empathy, which creates the perfect space for very candid feedback. And that's because employees feel that they can talk openly, that they're not being judged, that they can be transparent with confidence. Now, there are two ways that an employee can chat with Kim, and whether you're using our solution or not, we recommend that you have these communication pipelines. The first is an always available functionality. Whenever an employee wants to escalate a critical issue, they can reach out to Kim and she will ensure that it gets to the right leader. This makes sure that critical issues are identified before they become more serious public incidents. The second communication pipeline is when leaders want to understand employee thoughts on particular topic areas. And Kim can reach out and have those conversations at scale. So the question becomes, how do we know what conversations to have, what to talk about with which groups of employees? And that's where the network analysis comes in. Network analysis tells us who to talk to, what to talk to them about, and who to deliver the insights to. For example, I may know that members of my minority group X are on the periphery and not connected to key decision makers or strong mentors. Kim can actually engage with those employees, understand what their on-the-ground reality is, their immediate needs, and how to address them. So just to preface, these conversations that we're having, they're not reactive. We're not asking after the fact, hey, are you facing discrimination? Instead, we are focusing on the underlying issues and on resolving those issues before they escalate into public problems. So I actually want to take a minute here and show you an example of what one of these conversations look like. In this case, I am playing the role of an employee. I've chatted with Kim a couple of times in the past, so I know who she is. I know what's happening with my data. She has now reached out to me to get my thoughts on the project that ended last week. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this conversation. The first thing she wants to know is, do I feel like I had influence over the decisions made during the project? I'm going to say, not really. I felt like a lot of my ideas were ignored. And my misspellings and such get cleaned up by Kim on the back end. She also uses natural language processing to know that this is an area to dive in deeper on. So in this case, she wants to know if this is a trend that I'm seeing across the company as a whole. So I'm going to say something like, yeah, I feel like some of us need to keep proving ourselves and some have it easy. Now, Kim uses a couple forms of emotional analysis and sentiment analysis. Here, she wants to empathize with me that she knows this is something that's frustrating, that it's an area that the company is working on improving, and that my thoughts are going to be passed along anonymously. Now she wants to know if my project manager or if someone else is kind of showing an interest in my career progression. I'm going to say kinda, but he's not often available. Here, what I want to demonstrate to you is how Kim can integrate with your existing initiatives and programs. In this case, my company has a mentorship program. And because Kim saw that I don't have necessarily the right resources currently available in regards to career progression, she was able to understand that and then recommend me to go check out the mentorship program that the company has. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is one of the cool things about the chat interface, which is knowing when a chatbot is not appropriate for a situation. For example, if I was to say something like, I'm being bullied, or I'm seeing issues of harassment or other issues that are too serious for a chatbot to be handling, Kim can identify and flag those issues and immediately push me up into an escalation flow so that someone in leadership can contact me directly. Now, this is a conversation for demo purposes. Usually we'll have a couple more questions than this, but it will never take more than a couple minutes of an employee's time. And once that conversation is done, we surface insights on emotional analysis, topic analysis, sentiment insights. But the most important thing to remember, whether you're using our solution or any other, is that analytics alone don't equate to improvement. Just dumping data on already busy leaders is ultimately counterproductive, and we need to be giving them a clear pathway towards improvements. And that path starts with the conversations to understand employee issues. Then we broadcast and respond back saying, hey, we heard what you're saying, and this is what we're doing about your issues. Or to say, hey, we heard what you're saying, and we need help to know what to do about it. And that's where crowdsourcing comes in. Engaging employees in the solution building process to kick off your action planning. And finally, this is not a one and done kind of thing. The conversation is continuous, and you ensure that the needle is incrementally but consistently moving. Now, this is a process that Kim drives for Lean DEI. She will do all the outreach for broadcasting, for crowdsourcing, and for automated check-ins. But whether you use our tool or not, we recommend that these are principles that you follow. At the end of the day, employees should feel that if they engage in the feedback process, their issues are going to be solved in a timely manner. And people leaders should feel that if they engage in the process, they will always know what action to take. They never have to ask, what do I do next, when moving from identification of employee needs into resolution of an issue. Now, at this point, we have talked to employees that are impacted by D&I issues about the biases that they're facing, and we've delivered those insights to the people leaders that are positioned to drive change. And so the question becomes, now that we've actually set up a process, how do we ensure that those people leaders are able to make the right decisions and take the right actions? And for that, I'm going to pass it over to Anissa.
Thank you, Vivek. And this is where the right size solution comes in, and it's important. So I want to start with just what are the elements, right, of a comprehensive DEI program? Because each of these might be a solution depending on what that data and insights reveals through the identify and the engage process. So if we go through the breakdown of a comprehensive diversity, equity, inclusion program, the best practice is to fully leverage your programs, right, at the right time. So what are those programs? So first, you want to make sure you absolutely have and are developing a mentoring program that really considers and ensures that diverse individuals have opportunities to career pathing and mentoring. You want to make sure that you have a diversity focused recruiting plan, one that fits with your cultural values, and that you've trained your hiring and recruiting managers on what it means to eliminate biases in the recruiting and hiring process. You want to facilitate awareness and buy-in via unconscious bias training anti-racism and inclusion training. And to do that, you're also going to want to make sure you've got ready for conversations, because it's not enough just to require people to show up to a training and expect the culture to change. You're going to have some conversations around that and create a safe place for those conversations. You want to review and fine tune your discrimination and harassment policies on probably every 6 months, every year basis for sure. You're going to want to inspect, improve, and communicate your complaint systems. You want to foster diversified networks and cross-company networking and collaboration by establishing ERGs, your employee resource groups. And you're going to want to make sure that you've got a champion, a sponsor that is responsible for one or more of those ERGs so that they have a life of their own. Most of you already know this, but you're going to want to appoint diversity and inclusivity managers. And through that network analysis, it'd be really awesome if you were also cultivating your champions of change and creating that D&I committee that can support you in your initiatives. I've already said that, create a safe space for conversations about race and diversity. Inspire culture change via top-down support and of the D&I resolutions and values. This one seems obvious, but I say it because a lot of times the budget may be there, but the top-down support isn't there through your leadership team's behaviors and buy-in and participation. And for real culture change to happen, you're going to want to coach your senior leaders all the way down, your VP all the way down, that their buy-in is essential. If this is really a goal, their buy-in is essential, and they have to show up for this process as well. Finally, it's about that continuous improvement. So if we go into what that continuous improvement actually looks at, and the right size solution at the right time, right? You've got mentoring and train the trainer and facilitated discussion circles and micro consulting and coaching and training. But as we mentioned earlier, training alone can be divisive. Who needs micro consulting if you don't know exactly what your team needs or your culture, where they really are on the change continuum? So a lot of companies will put together a short-term solution and a mentoring program, but they find that it falls short because perhaps those mentors don't know how to mentor. That's where a micro consultant can come in and, like a laser beam, just support that initiative. And maybe it's an hour with one mentor because the other 10 mentors already have the skills. Great. Let's just focus on those right size solutions. Perhaps you find that you have a leader that's been accused of basic cluelessness about unconscious biases. Well, do you really need to do another unconscious bias training for the entire team because you've got one leader that just needs a little bit more? No. How about just anti-racism and unconscious bias coaching for that one leader? But now let's say that you've discovered that you have an organizational unit or a business unit that has higher turnover, and now with Engage and that conversation that's going on all the time, you're discovering that that unit actually has a culture issue that's different from the greater culture. Well, that's where that process of identify, engage, solve, identify, engage, solve, this iterative process of only the right amount of support at the right time. So if you have a business unit that needs additional attention, then you can do what we call your DEI expert, and they'll come in like a strike force and just do training or coaching or facilitated discussion circles for that group. Now, what's really important now to mention about this process of culture change is it's an iterative process. The cadence ensures change management through iterative cycles, right? So every 6 months, you're going to go through this identify, engage, solve. and you're moving from a network analysis to conversations directly to escalating issues to just the right support. And something that we haven't quite mentioned yet is your DNI. You want a DNI expert to be able to read between the lines of these conversations. I mean, it's one thing to have the data reveal, yes, I'm being harassed. It's a whole other thing to read between the lines when more than one individual is saying, no, it's all right. I don't know. I'm kind of looking for another position. And there's these subtle conversations that are shared anonymously, but there's a trend there. You've been asking them about the bias training that they just experienced, and we've we'll ask it in the right way to where we're not railroading people into, yes, raising my hand, I've been discriminated. That those kind of questions aren't what happens. But what needs to happen in this analysis is your dashboard will reveal trends. And you want to be able to look at those trends and then go, we've got a hotspot over here. We need to address it. But we don't need to do an enterprise-wide solution. Or if the trend is serious enough and you map it by keeping your eye on it, and you've got a turnover issue in all of North America or all of your Western region, now you've got a culture issue that needs an enterprise solution. A lot of organizations apply enterprise solutions or those one-off solutions, and then they're disappointed in the results. So now that you've listened to your employees, you've helped them, you've heard their biases, you've helped them increase their awareness on the biases, and now you've specifically provided targeted development for your people leaders and your DNI committee and your champions of change. You've empowered them to take the right actions and make the right decisions. So that's the overall framework for Lean DEI. For us, we haven't actually mentioned yet something that I think is pretty important. We've been working in this space for a very long time, and we've worked with many clients and of all different sizes in every different industry you can imagine and across every sector. Our collective experience literally includes at this point decades of working with companies in the public, private, government, education, for-profit, nonprofit. And as the DNI landscape has changed, so has the methodology for driving culture change in your organization. So the framework that we hope that you'll also go home and use in your initiatives looks like identifying through network analysis, engaging with artificial intelligence, and solving with coaching. These three major steps allow you to have an iterative, continuous cycle that ensures culture change, which is why it's different.
And we talked about in the at the beginning of our webinar, we talked about why things, what is fundamentally wrong and structurally flawed with DEI programs. In comparison, let's go through what we think, a holistic strategy for DEI that Lean DEI really tries to embody, what that brings to the table. The identify, engage, solve iterative process should sound, for anybody trained in Lean, Six Sigma, Agile, it should sound so familiar. I know from a Lean standpoint, it's plan, do, check, act. That's the iteration we're taught in Lean manufacturing. Well, in Lean DEI, it's the same process, just we just call it identify, engage, solve. But it's the same focus on continuous improvement. It's that same people-driven, people-focused change that is ongoing, but it's very targeted to the people who are on the ground, who actually are impacted. It is not just some idea that someone central in HQ dreams up and says that it's, oh, this sounds like a great training. It's people on the ground who are actually telling us, no, this is where our issues are. This is what we need. And that's what we target. That's what it's customized. It's not just a one size fits all. It's a customized iterative process. And most importantly, it provides support. You now have support for your leaders who are already well placed in the positions of change. And also one of the things, and this is, me coming from my finance background, right? I want ROI. And the thing about something like this is we can provide that measurable ROI, because every time we come in to do that network analysis, every time we do that engage through Kim, we can actually start to track data, and we can start to say, okay, here is how people are engaging. Here are the issues. Hey, we're not hearing about mentorship anymore when we talk to people. So you're doing really well. That network looks now, it doesn't look like just a bunch of threads, just a bunch of people just walking around. Now it's an actual thread and an actual fabric of your organization. We can see that. We can provide that measurable ROI and build that long-term impact so that we can actually help you and your organization move that needle. It's no longer an investment that is just going into that black box. We can actually show that, no, it's not. We can actually, you are making a difference. You are building a cohesive organization in using that money and all your energy for it. So that's really our key goal around Lean DEI. And that's what we hope you guys take away. We've talked about a lot of different things, but most importantly, as we said, we'd love to hear from you guys. We are going to share this slide deck with you. We also have a few one-pagers to share on some of the big takeaways, like Anissa's, elephant in the room, and the ticking time bomb of the social identity, how to diffuse that ticking time bomb. I know that those are really, really useful. So we have created those for you, and we're happy to share all of that data, because most importantly, we want this to work for everybody. We're passionate about D&I more than about anything else. So we'd love to have the conversation. Please contact us, call us, email us, go onto our website. There's a place for you to schedule a meeting right there on the website, just a quick brainstorming session, whatever you need. And we look forward to talking with you guys. Anissa, you're on mute.
Excellent. And if you have any questions, we have a few more minutes for the top of the hour. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. I know that last time, one of the questions that we had were, what are microaggressions, for example? And there's this really great book. The author, I have her name on the tip of my tongue. Let's see, who is it? Oh, yep. It is Tiffany Jana and Michael Barron. The book is called Subtle Acts of Exclusion. It's how to understand, identify, and stop microaggressions. And microaggressions, let me give you a couple of examples. A woman that is sharing ideas in the middle of a meeting and someone talks over her. Because women are historically have been experienced to be seen and not heard in some cultures, including our own, that's a microaggression. The person that's talking over that woman may not think that they're being aggressive, but they are. Assuming a non-white person is foreign born, obvious microaggression. Saying to a man, oh, really? You got custody of the kids? Oh, assumes that men aren't good parents or somehow. There's also kind of clueless pieces in our conversations, right? That are, we're a bit clueless, right? So there's some inappropriate things that we say, like, don't sell me down the river. And You're Off the Reservation, and even Peanut Gallery come from places of our history that are very, very much based on discriminatory and racism. So that was one question that I know that we had that we wanted to answer.
Yeah. Did you guys have anything else? I mean, I know that we're almost at the end,
Mm-hmm.
but we'd love to hear from you guys. And yeah, I mean, microaggressions, all of these.
Here's one. What's your best suggestion of keeping diversity inclusion non-political?
That's a really good one. I mean, to me, I think it goes back to Anissa, that slide that you had around that ticking time bomb, right? It's keeping it around results, focusing on the results and the benefits of diversity. That has and the impact that diverse organizations and diverse teams have regardless of your political affiliation. I mean, this shouldn't be a political issue,
Yeah.
to be totally
It
honest. This
shouldn't.
is
It's
just
the
a
training
cultural issue.
framework, right? Whatever the discussion circles are, whatever the training framework is, there needs to be permission. You get to be whoever you want to be. You get to hold your political views. You
Yep.
get to maintain those. And the values of this organization are respect and empathy for one another. And that means during these discussion circles or during the unconscious bias training, we're not accusing someone of having the wrong political affiliation. Instead, we walk it back and say no. But as a unit, we must appreciate each other's differences, even when we don't agree. We can bring our diversity to play to benefit one another, to care for one another as human beings, and to foster a more respectful culture. But that's a framework, right? It has to be set up front, or you will run into political dynamos and polarizing conversations in the middle of a training that are much more difficult to diffuse if you haven't put the speed bump in place ahead of time.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, diversity and empathy means empathy for all, regardless of your political views. Absolutely.
Vivek, do you see this next question?
I do, yeah. And actually, the last point I'll make on the previous question is that diversity in isolation easily becomes political. That's why programs like only increasing diversity hiring without doing anything inclusion focused are kind of destined for long-term failure. That's why we are lean DEI. So it's not just about diversity, it's about equity and inclusivity as well.
Thank you.
So we have a question here. In regards to, can the AI chatbot do escalated comments get reported anonymously? That's a great question. A huge part about engaging with employees in a long-term manner is building trust in the process, not just about having those one-offs. And part of how we build that trust is being very clear about where is the data going, when is it anonymous versus not anonymous. So by default, all interactions with Kim are anonymous. When we identify an issue that's very serious that we're going to escalate, at that point, we actually ask the employee, hey, this sounds like something pretty serious. Can you share your email so that someone can reach out with you? If they choose not to share any personal information at that time, which they do have that choice, we will still report some demographic information so the organization has a way to kind of kick off an investigation without having to know exactly who that individual was.
Vivek, can you talk a little bit more about that those important piece, anonymity? I said that word terrible, and transparency.
Yeah. So a lot of the time we look at anonymity as the only piece for having a employee engagement program. So like, hey, our engagement survey is anonymous. Really, from an employee's point of view, they know that nothing is 100% anonymous. Like, yeah, maybe it's anonymous, but if you filter it down to only female engineers in New York City, probably you can figure out who's saying what. So the much more important piece is being transparent. So knowing who exactly is on the other end, being able to read what data and what scenarios. So whenever Kim reaches out to ask questions, say about feedback on a leader, you can actually learn from Kim, is that leader going to be able to read that feedback? Who else in the organization is going to see what you can say? And while we never attach names, except for when we specifically ask the employee, we also try to be extremely upfront and clear about what is happening with the employee feedback. Because the cycle we want to build is when you give feedback, you're going to see timely results and action in response to your issues, not that someone is going to chase after you because you said the wrong thing.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, I know we are at the end of our time together. Please reach out. We know that lean DEI is not a fit for every organization, and yet I hope that you take away from this a framework that'll work for you. But I also hope that if we could serve as a brainstorming partner, if we could supply you with consulting, even I'm not even talking about a paid consulting. I'm talking reach out if we can support you. It is part of our mission and our purpose. And if we can make a difference in your organization, whether it's through Lean DEI or through our expertise, it would be truly our privilege. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to your feedback and to serving you. Thank you guys.